welcome back to Stinging Back. This is M. We've got A, we have D, and we also have a special guest from I.C.A.C Unpacked, Norm. Now, during an investigation and trial, there are constitutional rights in place to ensure you receive a fair process. Most importantly, the Fifth Amendment, which protects against self-incrimination and guarantees due process, and the 14th Amendment, which ensures equal protection under the law, and that no one is deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. But here at Stinging Back, we don't share those cases where those rights are respected. We share the stories where law enforcement and prosecutors actively strip those rights away through deceptive tactics, evidence suppression, coercion, entrapment, and misuse of public platforms to manufacture crimes rather than prevent them. These are systemic violations, not one-off mistakes.
Today's episode is something special. We're joined by someone who's not only lived through one of these things, but who's also taken it upon himself to educate the public about what really goes on behind the scenes. Norm is a creator of the YouTube channel I.C.A.C Unpacked, and he's with us today to talk about his own experience and everything he's learned since then.
Hey, Norm, I appreciate you being here. Let's dive in.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Norm, for those who may not be familiar with your story, can you walk us through what happened to you? How you ended up being targeted by an ICAC sting operation?
Yeah, it's kind of complicated. In the summer of 2018, I had decided, I'd just come back from vacation with my daughter, and I decided that I would have a little fun. I was very stressed out, had a parent coming into the hospital and one going out of the hospital. I had a friend staying with me. There's a lot going on. I was doing a lot of work with the HOA in my local community, and I thought, every so often it'd be nice to have a date, get together. So I did what I never did before, which is to kind of, go on a adult site. I really didn't have much experience with social media at all. I'd never had Facebook. Facebook had been out there for 20 years or something, and I'd never really had much to do with it, or any of the other sites. I basically stayed in my lane, which was to be a high school Latin teacher. So it was kind of overwhelming when I went on the Grindr site, thinking that I every so often have a nice little hookup, and I was just immediately engrossed. As a reason why they call it a meat market, I guess. Engrossed by I don't know how many people who were interested. It was overwhelming. In the process of everything else I was doing, I was apparently hit on by somebody who looked like they presented as a 15-year-old, but they were very unclear and very hesitant. I immediately began leveraging my training as somebody who was trained in trafficking and suicide ideation, and basically children who were at risk. I said, this is a person who shouldn't be there. So I directed the person off the site and tried to get them help. And what they essentially did, the ICAC sting people, was exploited my interest in trying to help this child and turned it around and made it appear as though I was grooming the person.
And of course, they know what they're doing, and that is they like to use that because they like to say, oh, they all say that they were trying to help a child, but they leave out the context of what they presented.
Right. And what was interesting about this site is that it did not, it's not as if the person came out and said, I'm underage. The person presented as an adult. I'd been talking to adults. I had finally met with one very briefly, who was in his mid-20s. And I had no reason to believe that there was anything amiss here. The person did not list an age, which I thought was strange, but not that odd, because I had lost track of my own profile, which I was told listed the default age of 99. This one had either 99 or no age attached to it, but continued talking to me for almost 100 messages before he finally revealed oh, I'm almost 15. At one point, almost 16. And the conversation got odd. I immediately had the system administrator notified. I had it deactivated, but I said, you really need some help. I'm going to try to help you. And so I asked that they talk to me on text. At no time did we exchange any sexual talk. So I was really surprised when we got to the end that I was arrested for doing what I'd always done as a teacher, which is try to help students.
Well, they flip the script all the time.
Yeah. And that's what they did. I mean, there were no warnings exactly. It's hard to explain. I mean, there was really no red flags or inconsistencies at first until the age was brought up. And, reflecting back on it, of course, I'm wondering why they even bothered, because I had no predilection for anything like that. I had just had a relationship with somebody who was in his 20s. So why would they think that I would necessarily be interested in anything else?
So there was nothing that made you question the authenticity of that conversation at that time?
Well, it depends on what you mean by authenticity, but the idea was no. I mean, I looked at this and I thought, I'm dealing with a troubled person. There was nothing that made me think that this was what we have come to believe and find later on, that people were role playing or anything of that sort. you know, um, Kids are like adults in that they have completely different personalities. This one seemed hesitant at first. Immediately told me a sob story, which I now know is the ICAC playbook. My father's in jail, my mother's this. I live with my aunt, but he kept trying to get me to come over or and visit at night, or to engage him in some kind of private place, and I wasn't interested. I told him no. I mentioned, we need to get you work, we need to get you some help doing something constructive, but I repeatedly said I wasn't interested in having a relationship with a young male. And it seemed odd to me looking back that the ICAC people didn't view that as dispositive enough. And I know that we have somebody who's a former police officer. Maybe he can explain why it is they wouldn't just back off at that point. It would seem to me, you know, they're not doing an investigation. That's what's interesting about this. They appear to be setting a trap. It's not like they got a tip and they came onto a site to investigate a potential grooming or a potential inappropriate relationship from the start. You know what I mean? They came on with the intention of finding somebody that they could maneuver into a trap. That's a very different thing, and it's a very dangerous thing.
And in this case, they were targeting specifically the LGBTQ community. And so, D, what was your question for D?
Well, I know. I just wonder if, what would be the reason that they would do that? It doesn't seem like it's anything short of what is colloquially known among, average people as entrapment. I mean, why would you go to such an extraordinary length to try to uh, create a criminal? I can't think of any other way of saying it, when you have all of these much easier sites. I mean, it seems to me I would hang out at, places where children hang out more and see if their parents misbehaving. They weren't even investigating a crime, is my point.
Some of my thoughts jump to, you have an attraction for a partner and you flirt and you try to make your moves, and that partner keeps saying, "Oh, I'm not interested in going there. I don't want to go there." Eventually you're going to stop. Someone with common sense is going to say, "Okay, I'm wasting my time. I shouldn't assert myself any further. I need to leave this person alone." You'd think law enforcement in these cases would do that also. This person's not going where we want this person to go. We need to stop and move on.
Or if we're doing a virtue test where we're trying to find out, which is problematic enough, at what point does law enforcement then say to itself, maybe nothing to see here?
Right.
But over and over again, we have learned that what they really do is they lead you down the primrose path by constantly changing the narrative. So they did this with me. So it wasn't enough that I said no and I blocked them from being on the site. And then in all my exchanges afterwards, it was not that I brought them to SMS texting because I was interested in grooming and keeping them from myself, as they claimed, and apart from other men on the site. It was that I must, or it was in fact that I was trying to get information to help the person and to help this individual. And if I was guilty of anything, it was the arrogance of thinking that I could understand what was going on with this kid, and I might have if it was a real kid in a real situation. And let's assume it was for a moment. Why wouldn't law enforcement then simply sit back and watch? They claim they go on these sites, we have come to learn, sit back and watch for something to happen. But they don't. They get very, very actively involved, and not with a real child that they are using as a decoy, but rather as somebody who is setting up what I write in my book, a 5-point system to effectively entrap people and make them appear to be doing something that they're not. That's what I find so amazing about this. And of course, it violates any number of constitutional rights, it seems to me, including the Fourth Amendment.
And in fact, they reached out to you, right?
Well, yes, that's another point too. They did reach out to me. I did not approach them. That's an important element of their predisposition to find someone. And my question then, I guess, would be to, then why would they continue to do that if they didn't have their own illicit purpose, as we have come to learn, to rack up stats to keep the grant money flowing? It seems to me you simply sit out there. If it's such a dangerous place for children, you sit out there and you wait. You wait. Do they show up? Is somebody saying, hey, do you know somebody younger? You have somebody younger? No, I mean really young. You know what I mean? And they don't do, that's not what happens. And children don't really respond to that in that way.
What do you think about that, Dee?
Something that I picked up on that I thought was kind of interesting in the earlier conversation was he mentioned that the decoys said that he was 15 going on 16. That's kind of a trend with ICAC. It's as if they're trying to de-stimulate the emotion that comes from talking to a child like that, right? Everything about these things are designed to entrap people. That's why I encourage people to come out with the entrapment argument as soon as you can, because you don't just automatically get that argument. You have to build for it, right? So once the jury is instructed that, it's potentially that this would have never occurred if law enforcement, didn't coerce. I think a lot of us feel like they did not actually commit the crime because the crime is based upon your belief. And as we've seen in, the newest of the YouTubers come out that's just played, there's a certain amount of sexual confidence and maturity that comes from, people you meet on the internet. And you can certainly tell when it's not somebody who they're saying that is. So the reasonable doubt is in your mind. The problem is, it's they're marketing it as a really, excuse me, as a really heinous offense. So they are able to emotionally hijack the jury the same way that they emotionally hijack you. It's extremely clever. If it was taken out of context, and let's say, for example, ICAC is running it almost like a drug. They're trying to get you to buy an illicit drug. Not only would it be highly illegal, it would be RICO.
And if you go and you look at the training curriculum that they have in their semi-annual or annual conferences around the nation, They used to have some of those online, and they have hidden them a little bit more. At least I can't find them anymore. But if you read through it, it talks about how to uh, basically start the conversation, what to say, how to pretend to be a 15, 16-year-old boy or girl. And they are lowering the age. We're noticing now too below 15 because you can rack, stack, and pack the charges much higher up. But if you have, and these trainings are designed obviously to lure somebody into the trap they set. But the way that they are marketed to the public and to the courts, to the legal establishment, is that this is what we need to do to get these bad people off the street. When in reality, it's simply refining what is, in effect, a criminal enterprise to take away people's constitutional rights and to make them into something that they're not. I mean, we've seen video footage from body cam from a Florida-based sheriff's office, right, talking about what they do at the end of their script when they move for the arrest. And if you don't use critical thinking skills, that can be very compelling to you. It's very dramatic, and they, of course, they get to be the one that narrates the entire thing. But what you don't know is what brought them to that moment. And when you question them on this, police get very defensive, and they do not want to show their statistics. ICAC's primary mission is to save real children, but in fact, they don't really have any stats on that. I asked here in our local community for those stats 4 years ago. I was assured we would get them. They assured me there were hundreds and hundreds of people every year that they rescued. And after confronting them with some statistics that we had gotten through FOIA, we discovered that that quickly went down to just a few dozen. And then, gee, I don't really know. I'll get back to you. And we haven't heard back from them. So as long as they refuse to see the field of battle or allow us onto the field play where we can question them and they have stats, they're going to continue to get away with these sorts of things.
Well, and the most important fact that they are not telling the public about what they do with these sting operations is that they are soliciting men for sex. That is a fact that can be proven, but they gloss over that. They don't want to talk about it. The vigilantes will talk about it and say, well, it was a minor, and that minors can't consent. They ignore the fact that real minors just don't behave this way. This is the behavior of a sexually mature and experienced adult male. This is not like, the behavior of any real minor. And so I think it's important for the public to know that they are soliciting men for sex. And if anybody has ever seen the Grinder app, I used to hang out with I had a lot of gay friends, gay guy friends, and I've seen the Grinder app. I have seen what is on there. And I think if your defense attorney had simply opened up that app, I mean, I know not everybody wants to see that, but it is what it is because this is what these police officers have created. Open up the app and show them what is on there and show this is, where they are saying they were saving and protecting children from. They are saying that children were on this app looking for adult men, looking at these images and soliciting men from this place for this.
And you can look at a lot of the people on there, they don't look like children, obviously. And the person that I saw didn't look like a child at all, looked like a young man. And of course, he was a young police officer. But I believed what the person said because, again, I didn't have a lot of experience on there. And everything I did was proactive. But, you said a couple of things that I wanted to respond to. The first one is, yes, by pretending to be a child, you do have to wonder if they're not endangering children by putting that out there, and even putting it so much out there that people actually think, well, gee, if police are on there looking to protect real children, there might be real children. I could see that being a magnet for somebody who might want to hurt children. But I have heard on my site from people who have been all over the world, and none of them have responded in exactly the same way. Alex VA, who was responding on there to me, as far as I was concerned, was a young person who was in danger in some way. And I didn't know the nature of the problem. I didn't know exactly how to solve the problem, but I didn't feel that I could walk away from the problem. To me, I was being a responsible individual because that's what I had always done. I didn't think for much of a moment. I think maybe once it crossed my mind, but I don't, not to the point where I became fearful. I just had to hold on to this particular person so that by the very fact that I was interested along the way, they made that interest into something that was less than pure. And they then took these glossy headlines and put those out there like, we could both get in trouble, they said in one of the headlines. Well, I did say that, absolutely. And you had mentioned context, A. So context matters. And so to take that out of context, what it meant was I was, in the end, talking to somebody on the phone I didn't really want to talk to, but they forced a conversation because they could see the type of person I was. And the conversation had to do with the mistake that they exploited. The detective pretended to be this person that I had a relationship with because that was the only place that there was any sexual talk. They then tried to go to court and pretend like that was really the Alex VA conversation, that I knew who I was talking to all along, and it was really Alex I was trying to influence, even though it's very clear when you put the conversations together that Zach is a different person. That's the sort of thing that they blur the lines of context, they blur the lines of propriety in an environment where there's fetishism and role play and young gay kids coming on there just looking around, or people who are cross dressers, or people who are just looking. They're not interested in meeting somebody. They just want somebody to talk to. And in that very, very um, uh, tender, I'm trying, words are escaping me, but tender, vulnerable environment, police play. And that there's no reason why they're on there. They have absolutely no business being on there if they don't have a tip. This is why we have in the law the idea of the reactive stings or the reactive investigation. You get a tip, you run that tip down for its authenticity. Then you begin an investigation if it seems warranted. And then at the close of that, you do some interviews and perhaps make an arrest. You don't do it the way they do it, which is you have no reason to be on there. You have nothing you're investigating. You're not looking for anybody in particular. They weren't coming after me. I was never a target until they made me a arbitrary, impersonal target. And that is something that has to stop.
So I want to clarify something. When you are talking about when they impersonated someone else, so I want to make it clear for the audience that this is after they had reached out to you and then you switched over to text messaging. At some point, that conversation ended, and then you were talking to multiple people or other
Yes.
people, somebody else you had met on this Grinder app, and you were reaching out to somebody else or thought you were reaching out to somebody else, but it happened to be the police decoy, and they responded to you pretending to be them. So I just wanted to clarify for
Yeah,
M
that
and D and for the
as I
audience.
said, it is complicated. So let me explain what happened. So on the second or third day I was on the site, as I said, I'm talking to a lot of people. I'm overwhelmed by all the attention. I also have a lot of personal things going on in my life. That morning of the second or third day I was on there, I did meet with this young man named Zach in a hotel room. And I didn't stay for very long. I did not feel comfortable because it was a third person there that I didn't exactly expect. And so I agreed to contact the person. Zach and I agreed we'd talk later on. In the afternoon, I realized that I had promised to pay for part of the room. So my response in the afternoon was, oh, something to the effect of, where are my manners? I promised to pay, and I didn't do that. And that's where the conversation picked up from there. Only I wasn't talking to Zach at that point. I was talking to Detective Bauer, who was pretending to be Alex VA. My error, my honest mistake, was I typed into the communication block of the police officer. And the police officer pretended, he impersonated an actual subscriber for no reason, none whatsoever, and followed the conversation along until I got wise and said, wait a minute, this isn't Zach. Who is this? And he said, oh, this is Alex. I thought you were talking to me. Now, no rational person, even a teenager, would know damn well that that didn't happen that way. And so I was angry, and I made it known I was angry. But then the detective manipulated me right then in the most vicious way. He pretended to be upset. I thought you wanted a relationship with me. Why did you say all these things? And I was mortified that here I was trying to protect this kid in another part of the platform, and I had inadvertently typed into the wrong place in my busyness. And yes, there was a lot of sexual talk because I was talking to an actual adult person named Zach. And if you match up my last conversation with Zach with this new conversation, it matches perfectly. It does not match at all with what I was saying with Alex VA. They tried to use that at pretrial. They were not successful, but they claimed that there was a real person and that Zach and Alex VA were the same person. Where they won is when I had the detective banned and we were talking on SMS messages for about 2 weeks. I didn't hear from him for a couple of days. At this point, I thought he was suicidal. I had gotten enough information to see that he was disturbed. He was upset with me because I would not get together with him. He was coming from a vulnerable home, and there were signs that he might be trafficked because they mentioned that this older man would come over there as soon as the aunt would leave, and he called him the aunt's boyfriend. So now I'm wondering, who is this aunt? Is this a trafficker? Who is the boyfriend? So when I didn't hear for a couple of days, I got nervous. I sent a message everywhere I could, including accidentally or not accidentally, excuse me, to the Alex VA account that I had suspended. Here's where it gets weird or tricky or whatever you want to say, but this is where trolls don't want to believe it. But the evidence is right there. The way Grindr worked in 2018 is when you had it suspended, it still remained there. The last vestiges, the last message, the last picture with the light on was still there. Nowadays, if you block somebody, it goes away. If you close out your application, log out or whatever, it goes away. Okay, that's the way it works today. That's not the way it worked in 2018. So here I'm looking at this kid he's still on the app, even though I had him blocked. Desperate to find him and thinking he might be in danger, I sent a message there saying, contact me or something to that effect. Of course, Detective Bauer, when he gets to court, says, I sent a picture. Check my picture, which is not at all what I said. I have all the messages, not what I said. Detective Bauer's thinking, I've got to go back and check out that message. And what he finds is what I did not know, because while I had been notified that the application that they had received my request to suspend that underage profile, they never told me they actually followed through on it. And based on what I was seeing, it looked active. Detective Bauer goes to log on to that and realizes that he has a defunct app. He has no control over it. It's stuck. He quickly makes a new profile and calls it Alex. He subsequently contacts me talking as a new person in my feed. And you have to understand, I'm talking to two Alexes, an Alexander, an Alexis. I'm talking to a lot of people. This is a new person as far as I know. It didn't have the same picture, but he contacts me, hunts me down a second time, talks to me for, I don't know, 25, 30, 40 messages before he says, oh, by the way, this is Alex. I want you to find me. I said, well, what do you mean find you? I don't know what find you. What are you talking about? And he says, I changed my pic. Well, I'm looking at that picture of the Alex VA. I'm talking to a number of other people, including this new Alex, who is really the detective. And he's saying, come find me. I said, I don't know how to find you. I'm looking at it now. What are you talking about? No pictures changing. So we go through this ridiculous exercise. And what he does is he finally convinces me that the new profile, Alex, is also Alex VA. And now I'm really pissed. And I say something to him. I'm really annoyed with that. I said, why are you playing this game? What are you talking about changing your picture? Instead, he created a whole new profile. They were able to convince the judge, and I'll shut up after this. You can see it's complicated. They were able to convince the judge that I knew all along the two were the same. And therefore, I must be guilty of trying to solicit a minor. And that's what they did to convict me. There was a picture that ended up being in my in the defunct app of a part of me, let's say. I have no knowledge of that picture being there. That's how they were able to do that. I hope that makes some sense to you.
So they manipulated all of the discovery that way.
All of it. Everything. They manipulated the entire thing to make it appear. And their argument was because I went to talk to Alex VA or in this news guise as Alex, I must be knowledgeable of what's going on all along. I knew it all along, and therefore I'm guilty. To me, that's most heinous. I think you described it as heinous, despicable thing to do to a person. And again, there was no sex talk after I knew who they were. Of course, my initial response to Alex with the bathroom icon, they used the male bathroom icon for their new profile, was the same thing. Your height, your weight, what are you interested in, that kind of thing, right? Of course, that was, oh, he's interested in a date, but it doesn't make sense because it's new biographical information. Clearly, I thought this was a new person.
Was it clear that they were trying to stir the conversation towards sex? Were they trying to get you to provide a sexual conversation to them or letting you know they wanted a sexual hookup?
Well, in a way, yes. But remember, this is a new profile. I was talking to a bunch of Alexes. This was a new Alex that showed up because of the geolocation feature. This was a new Alex. As far as I was concerned, Alex is a very common name, like Daniel or Mark or David. They're very common names. And if the police officer wasn't trying to deceive, why didn't he say, "Hey, my profile, something happened to it. I created a new profile. I'm going by this name." Then I could see the profile. I know exactly what they're talking about. But I'm looking at this same picture. The light's still on. It's called Alex VA. It's still there. He didn't say I changed my name. I changed my picture. So there was no reason for me to think at all that this was anybody named Alex VA. It was just some new one named Alex.
Keep it vague and keep you intrigued and confused.
We see that pattern. We've seen that pattern throughout all of these cases where they twist the facts into what they need it to be, what they want it to be. And of course, they omit the important facts that they, like they were soliciting you for sex. And, because you said you were trying to help someone, they'll use that against you and say, oh, yes, that's what all the predators say. But, the public would understand that if they presented the full evidence and the context
Right.
of the situation, show the website that they were on and show that they were soliciting sex and show why it's logical to assume what you assumed. Or, this was a very odd situation that you had, of course, never come across before because it's not realistic. So it's
Well,
normal that you didn't really know
yeah.
how to respond to this or react to this.
Well, not only that, there's no predisposition. There's nothing in my background or history or anything. But the court didn't care about that. They weren't concerned about any of that issue. They bought totally into the idea that you must be grooming because you continued to talk. Again, there's no sex talk. All right. The worst, I've been asked many times by the trolls, why don't you release all of the evidence? Well, you can see by the complexity of this. Can you imagine what they will do with this? Slicing it up, dicing it up, twisting it around. If you just go to the phone calls at the end, as that has been thrown in my face too, you have me saying things like in response to, well, what would we do if we got together? Well, I don't know. Maybe something, maybe not. I don't know. Well, I could get in trouble. And I respond, yes, we both could get in trouble. That is interpreted to mean I could get in trouble with law enforcement. But if you're using counseling techniques, you align with the person because at this point, he's told me now in two conversations, both abruptly ended when he said things like, I have to hide. They're looking for me. They're looking over here. Oh my God, I have to go around the corner. I have to talk to you in hiding. I have to be quiet or they'll find me. I was terrified because it seemed to me I'm wandering into a case here where there's somebody who's being trafficked. If I let go of this, I don't know what I'm doing. If I let go of this kid, who knows what might happen? I arrogantly thought that I could get information with which to go to law enforcement. But again, if you go to law enforcement, what are you going to find? I talk about this, I think, on my site. What's the kid's name? Alex. Where does he live? Fairfax. Fairfax City or County? I don't know. How old is he? I don't know. He says somewhere between 13 because he says at one point, I'm almost 14, between 13 and 16. Where is he? I don't know. What's the address? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And somebody said to me, well, why didn't you provide the phone number? The truth is, I never thought of it. I'm not a techie guy. And I get caught up in the scenario of a 2-week period where there was a lot of other things going on. But what was never going on was sexual talk with somebody after I knew that there was a minor. But when they had my phone, interestingly enough, for a few hours, that's when it appeared that we discovered that there was a picture of a part of me in that defunct app. And the question I ask repeatedly now, in hindsight, is how did a picture get into an app account that had been closed at my request? How did that happen? How did it happen that a picture got in there? I have
Well,
no idea.
well, we know they tamper with,
We do
they
know.
have tampered with the evidence in many of these cases, and they manipulate a lot of it as well. I wanted to ask Dee, what do you think about the fact that they reached out to him? Because, they're always claiming, oh, we never reach out to the men. We let them contact us and we let them bring up sex first. What do you think about the fact that they reached out to him?
I think it's all defunct by now. Sorry to interrupt, Dee, but we've proven over and over again that it's not true. They don't wait and sit around. They're proactive.
For sure. Dee, are you there?
I think that's the nature of the proactive sting to begin with. That's why they do 70, 80% more at a minimum proactive stings and reactive stings because studies have demonstrated that fewer kids are going online. They're more savvy online. They don't put a lot of information online. I've done some research and I've talked to some people around the world who have contacted me, and they have told me as a young person, they went online and they didn't, put it all out there as it were either. And so, the idea that kids are being preyed upon constantly online in this forum, I'm not saying kids aren't, victims at times, but on adult dating sites or hookup sites is not where the problem exists. And the fact that police refuse to discuss their sources and their methods and show their chat log and really drill down into the weeds with the stats. Well, when Reason.com and a couple of other papers, online publications, investigated, they found it was a lot more nuanced and a lot less violent than what police were claiming.
Let's try D again. I wanted to ask D, what do you think about the fact that in Norm's case, it was police who reached out to him, and they're always claiming that they don't ever reach out to the target. They just sit there and wait for someone to contact them. What do you think about that fact, D?
For me, I listened to Norm's case, and it is a problem that they started the conversation first because, again, that's entrapment, that's government grooming. But my biggest takeaway from Norm's case, and I feel like the jury should have been instructed to look at the case from a different angle of this occurred due to police coercion and manipulation, is I don't understand because when I was a law enforcement, like I was always busy. I mean, I didn't have much time to sleep, eat, or really even use the bathroom. I'd rack up about 200 to 300 miles a day. So when I'm listening to Norm's story, I see them spending a long period of time in order to get him to commit this crime. So you have this long conversation, and then you have the bait and switch of, hey, by the way, I'm this age. And what that's designed to do is it's designed to have this person emotionally invested in this person. So that becomes what becomes anchor point bias, is where he's trying to find a reason to make it work, maybe. But in Norm's case, he goes ahead and he blocks the person and moves on. So then they start up a new account. And that's where we get into a mile and a half into entrapment. Now, I'm pretty sure Norm feels like he didn't commit the crime in the first place. However, it becomes a case of how does it look like to a jury? That's why entrapment is a very strong argument that makes the jury look at it from a different angle.
Yeah, in my case, I had a bench trial. My attorney, who wasn't the greatest attorney in the world, he didn't feel confident with the prospective jury pool that we had. And I was told that the judge was very fair. But again, this bench trial judge, he wasn't very fair. He had said, they played the entire interrogation video, and my attorney did not object at all throughout. And in the video, and I do several of my own ICAC Unpacked videos on there, where I go through and I've been working on this in my book too. I quote heavily from it, and I explain that, for example, and this is a question I'd like Dee to answer too. He wouldn't let me lift the phone up off the table. Remember, the conversations about part of the conversations had been erased from Alex VA's profile from the detective's phone because I had it, defunct. I had it erased, but I didn't realize I'd been successful with that. So he needed part of my phone and part of his phone. So he kept forcing me to look down at the phone at an angle. I couldn't see it as much. He would scroll rapidly through it and try to get me to agree with his assessment, which didn't comport with my memory of the situation. So we went back and forth on that. The judge never asked a single question. He was busy up there, hardly looked up. He was busy writing down things, and I had a sickening feeling he was doing paperwork that he needed to do for my guilt, my conviction. And then when we got to the end of this 2 days, on the second day, we ended at exactly noontime. He announced he had to leave the courthouse to go to an appointment. He was going to go to the appointment, get lunch, come back, read through this mountain of evidence, and proclaim his decision within that 2 hours, which is simply, as I told my attorney at the time, not credible. He didn't have any interest in it at all. And as Dee said, the fact that I continued to talk to this person, regardless of the content of what we're talking about, just was proof positive that I must be guilty. But that's what teachers do. We talk to students. That's what we do. Okay? These are our customers. That's what we do all the time. It's the most natural thing in the world.
You know, I like hearing the whole story. There's details. I hope the listeners are getting these little details are what matters. The discovery that they manipulate, the way they manipulate the wording, the way they play their games, it's all important information. But so what's your message to others who may be going through this right now, whether they're the accused or the family of someone who's been targeted?
This is really, really difficult because there's substantial differences in each case that it's hard to come up with something. The worst thing of all is to be put in a position that, fortunately, I was spared. My conviction was 3 years with all but 7 months suspended, and that was still above guideline. I served 6 months in the county jail because in Virginia you serve 87% of your sentence. However, I had the rest of the active incarceration hanging over my head, which I might have been nailed with because I was violated twice for phony probation violations, but for a change in the law, which made it much more favorable on probation and made it harder for them to prove things. Otherwise, I was facing another 5 years. There are people facing 100 years, 50 years, 30 years. And there's a great degree of pressure on them in our plea bargain society for, police will rack, pack, and stack those charges, offering you 150 years, and you're happy to take 10 or 12 or 15 or 5 or 8 or 7 or whatever it is, even though you're innocent and you should get 0. So what do you say to somebody when they come to you and they say, what should I do? They tell you their story. You don't know necessarily their judge or their jury or even fully the laws of their state. What do you say? That's a terrible place to put a person in. And so the message is, I chose very early on, I told my attorney, under no circumstances am I going to cop a plea. In fact, I couldn't tell you what my plea was because I told my attorney, do not tell me. I'm not going to discuss it with you. I don't care what it is. I'm not doing it. And I was facing a mandatory 5 years. And there are people facing far, far worse than that. And there are people being incarcerated for worse than that for doing about what I did. So the message is, as soon as, we know for certain, when you go on there, as soon as they bring up this false age, disengage. But even that doesn't fully protect you because we have evidence that police have gone out of their way to come after you even after you disengage. Even up to 4 years later, they come after you. So what do you tell somebody like that?
Yeah, it's extremely complicated.
Yeah, I mean, the message is to be aware that this is happening, that our government is doing this, and to learn to protect yourself from that, learn to recognize it. And when you learn to recognize it is when you can protect yourself from that. And you're right, even, some men have blocked them and then they end up coming back. So that's why we are very grateful for what you are doing, Norm, putting out this information out there and educating people about this, because that is the problem, that most people are just not aware of this. So, Norm, where can people find you and support the work you're doing with ICAC Unpacked?
Well, we're on YouTube. I didn't really ever want to be a YouTuber or a YouTube influencer. I really had no interest in it. But I felt, a couple of years ago, I needed to do something. So I went on YouTube and I developed, what I call ICAC Unpacked, Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force Unpacked, and ICAC Unpacked, UNPACKED exclamation mark on YouTube. And, now, of course, we have several others, including this podcast, joining the efforts. And we need it. We really desperately need. And I'm hearing from people all over the world, from India to South Africa to the US, Canada. Largely, unfortunately, we get a lot of people are not subscribing, but I've had 30,000 people around the world, Britain, Ireland, France, Netherlands, looking at this and in many cases commenting about it. And we're seeing this happen all over the place. And it is tragic how they're destroying lives and giving people a false sense that they're really taking people off the streets who would harm children. That's the thing. They're not helping anything. They're harming people's lives and they're not protecting children at the same time. Not in this forum.
Right. And these are the conversations we need to have more of.
Yeah, I should say so. So, whatever we can do, I'm committed to doing this for as long as it takes until we can get the message across. We have managed to make some inroads. I mean, we have a number. I don't want to take credit for anything I didn't personally do, but we are seeing state legislatures begin to look at the registry, the sex offender registry, which is fed by a lot of the stings, and saying, why are people on there for 20 and 30 years when 5 will do? We're looking at the prospect of these things and the morality of it and the manipulation of it. And what if police were actually on there, just sitting there watching? They would be bored out of their mind, is what would happen. There would be literally nothing for them to do. And if we can get to a point where, we can sit down with police and talk to them as members of the community, that I have been willing to go on vigilante sites or the predator hunter sites, which I don't agree with them. I've reached out to SOSA. I've not heard a response from them. I went on Arizona Predator Prevention for almost 4 hours while they grilled me pretty mercilessly. But by the end, they really were wondering, maybe there's something to what Norm is saying. Maybe there's something to it. And maybe it's not as simple as they're making it out to be. But when things get complex, people get nervous. They want things to be very simple and easy to understand. And again, that's a space in which the police can exploit the hell out of it.
Right.
So, Norm, thank you so much for joining us and for your courage in speaking out. This is exactly the kind of conversation that we need to be having more of.
Right. Now, before we go, a quick reminder to check out some vital resources. Visit the Lady Justice Myth blog for more on exposing these injustices. Watch ICAC Unpacked on YouTube. We have a new friend with Jest Played on YouTube. His latest video was very eye-opening. You all should look at it. It's JEST PLAYED. And of course, we're stinging back.
And to our listeners, if this episode resonated with you, please share it. Follow us for more stories like Norm's. And let's keep exposing the truth. Until next time, this is Stinging Back. Stay aware and stay strong.